And it is such an honor to bring to Griffin Spalding County Samuel Cross, who is the Deputy International Affairs Officer for the Young Democrats of America, or YDA, where he manages the organization's Latin American portfolio and represents the United States at the International Federation of Liberal Youth. He is pursuing his Master of International Affairs at the George Washington University Elliott School, specializing in Latin America, and holds a bachelor degree in History from Rhodes College. He recently completed 2 years of Peace Corps service in Panama's Nobe Bugle Comarca. Panama's Nobe Bugle Comarca, where he designed public health education programming and serves as a medical interpreter for over 1,500 patients across cross-cultural clinical settings. He previously worked in Congressman Steve Cohen's district office, that's up in Memphis, right?
Yeah.
Yep. And co-founded a global support network for Peace Corps volunteers that successfully fended off Elon Musk's Doge in 2025.
Congratulations.
Yes. In 2026, he was selected as a Common Futures Conversations member with Chatham House, the British Royal Institute of International Affairs, and in 2022, he was recognized as a Changemaker Fellow by the Jewish Federations of North America. Let's give him a warm Griffin welcome. And just before we get started here, I would just like to ask, who here is from Spalding County, lives in Spalding County? Please raise your hand.
Lives now.
All right. And who lives in Fayette County? Anyone joining us from Upson? All right, well that got all the hands. So thank you so much for being here from the South Metro area and beyond. And I'm gonna turn it, well, let me say, after Samuel gives us a little update on international affairs and the Democratic Party's stance on several things, certain topics, we're gonna open it up to questions from the audience. So you can just raise your hand to be called on, and then we're going to have a discussion. So it's not just going to be question and answer, it'll be question, answer, and then a little bit of room discussion if we like. And we will try and move on and respect everybody's time as things go by. And once again, you can put in an anonymous answer as well. So Samuel, thank you for being here.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Commissioner, and good evening, everyone. It is so great to be back here at Griffin, Georgia. Unfortunately, we're going to talk today about something that's not going so well. I'm going to be blunt. We're not in a good position right now as far as foreign affairs go. I could sit here and list the numerous crises raging across the globe as we speak. I could talk about the corruption that is driving both our domestic and our foreign policy, or I could talk about the economic downturn that is just on the horizon, waiting to devastate multiple countries' economies. But at the center of all of it is one core problem that pertains to us as a nation. International relations is built on reliability, and we as a country have lost ours. The story of America's crisis of reliability is a tale of two Trumps. The first Trump administration came in and cracked the world's trust in the United States, but the second one has come in more reckless and more aggressive and has shattered it. We saw the first symptoms of this crisis during the Biden administration, when his attempts to re-engage with the global community were fundamentally stunted by a fear that any agreement we made was only one election away from being reversed and nullified. Some countries were willing to give us the benefit of the doubt, especially in Europe. Others, like Iran, who were already skeptical of Washington, just saw more reason to doubt us. By electing Trump a second time, our friends were left feeling as though they had made the wrong choice. And it proved to the others that America was indeed a bad negotiating partner. This is exactly what Canada's Mark Carney was speaking to when he envisioned a new world of the middle powers. Damage to this extent doesn't undo itself at the ballot box through electoral politics. Whoever succeeds the Trump administration, and very likely the administration following that, will have to repair the damage done by this administration and the harm it has done to our reputation globally. And that is just the toll among our friends and our partners. It is just as deep of consequences among our adversaries. Yes, it is important that your partners need to know that when you sign a deal, you'll stick to it. But it is just as critical to our security that our adversaries understand when we say we will do something, we will follow through with it. Instead, this administration has used negotiations to lull our enemies into false confidence and drop their guard, treat ceasefires as words written on a piece of paper and nothing more, and starts conflict for short-term political wins. The madman theory that Trump subscribes to may work well for him in a conference room in a business setting, but it is significantly more reckless and dangerous when your finger is on one of the only nuclear buttons in the world. Just to put it in perspective, the leader that chose to stand up and protect the New START agreement to maintain nuclear arms control was Vladimir Putin, not the US president, but the Russian president. And then in response, the Americans rejected the agreement. Instead, our leader posts rambling late-night tweets ordering us to resume nuclear weapons testing. What does that tell our allies about our stability and our credibility as international partners? What does it tell our adversaries about how stable we are as the person sitting on the other side of the table? Above all, reliability also assumes competence. It requires that your actions match your intentions, and on that we have failed in ways you would have never imagined possible. Just 2 weeks ago, our State Department sent the President's own HIV/AIDS envoy to the Global AIDS Conference in Rio, and he arrived carrying a map generated by AI, and on that map, it mislabeled every single partner country we were working with in Africa and used fictional borders that did not match any borders in the real map. Working for the Foreign Service used to be one of the most prestigious postings in the government, and now it is a posting that people dread. Incredibly talented professionals are leaving in droves and are being replaced by stooges whose only qualification is that they're able to pass the new loyalty test being administered. It would be incredibly easy and probably very gratifying to spend this next hour discussing what we wish the world order looked like, or what we would do if we were just back in the Oval Office. But we're still a few years away from that. So I'd rather use this time to talk about a piece of this crisis of reliability that we can actually work on right now. It is smaller than this moment deserves, but it's progress, and progress is something we need. I want to take us back a bit. Since the end of the Second World War, people around the world have come to know America through the trucks of food and medicine that arrived in their communities, with 3 letters emblazoned on the side: USA. They would come to learn about the American people through the USAID workers and the Peace Corps volunteers living amongst them on a mandate of peace and friendship. Critical water infrastructure, health education, and communications technology would appear in regions that even their own governments struggled to get resources into. The world knew that they could rely on us. No matter who was in power, no matter what our foreign policy may be, the aid would still come. Then along came Donald Trump, and then along came Elon Musk. And in the name of efficiency, they dismantled USAID. They orchestrated an armed takeover of the Institute of Peace, and they gutted PEPFAR, which is credited with saving an estimated 26 million lives. For the first time since the Second World War, the trucks stopped coming. Meanwhile, that department that Musk built to save taxpayers money ended up costing them an estimated $135 billion. All they actually succeeded in was decimating the globe's perception of the United States as food rotted away in warehouses throughout the globe, and millions of lives were put in jeopardy as their access to critical health care was ripped away overnight. You don't have to take my word that this was bad. The Republicans, including your own congressman here in Georgia 3, Brian Jack, just quietly restored some of what they had themselves cut. Of course, he's not going to stand up and say what he did was wrong. He would never do that. But you don't send money back to a program you just gutted unless you understand how much harm you caused. This is something we can take advantage of. We won't be able to get everything we want back or even back to where we were just a year ago, even if we retake Congress with this administration. But through concerted effort, this is a small piece of the crisis that we can fix right now. And if we can save even just one more life, it is worth it. And I know there is a lot of fear right now about humanitarian aid. I know there are a lot of people turning towards isolationism who feel the draw of the America First movement, who ask what is in it for us. So I want to offer you this. It has everything to do with you. Instead of letting our farmers struggle as they currently are, we can buy their crops and send it to feed the hungry. We can breathe life back into that local factory by increasing PPE production and sending it to combat health crises around the world before they show up on our own shores. We can strengthen our national security by building better ties with our neighbors instead of constantly looking over our shoulders. And we can do all of that, which will help pull our economy back from the edge of stagflation and will also restore the world's confidence in us for only 1% of the annual budget we spend. Currently, we are spending less than 0.1% on humanitarian aid, which is down from almost 20 years of spending an average of 1. We are at 1/10 of what was standard. And I know many of you did not come here tonight with humanitarian aid top of mind when you think about foreign policy. But this is one piece of the crisis where we have seen Republicans are willing to move. They understand what they did was wrong, and we can take advantage of this. So here's what I want everyone to do. We can do this tomorrow morning. Wake up. I want you to call your congressman's office. Call the DC office. The local office handles casework. The DC office handles policy. Make sure, look up their DC number and call them. Thank Brian Jack for the vote he cast to restore some of PEPFAR's funding in particular. PEPFAR is currently on life support. It has been operating without formal reauthorization from Congress since March of last year and is vulnerable to cuts every single time the Appropriations Committee starts working on the budget again. Ask him to continue the work he did while he was on the Rules Committee. Ask him to continue pushing for better funding towards PEPFAR, and ask him to go one further and co-sponsor a full reauthorization of PEPFAR and protect its funding in this year's state and foreign operations bill. All it takes is 90 seconds and a phone. And little by little, small amounts of pressure, we are able to increase our efforts to bring back humanitarian aid, tell the rest of the world we are still here and that we still care. And we can climb our way out of this crisis of reliability. And with that, I would like to hand it back to Commissioner Fuller, and we can move on to the discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for all that. It is definitely a scary world we're living in, and under this administration, we have to really fight just for regular resources. Yes, and please give us the honor of introducing us. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Oh yes, my name is Ebony Conklin. I am with FDW, which is Fed Democratic Women. I am the co-chair of All Things Voting, and I am an assistant secretary. I'm also a post-T holder for Spalding Dems and voter liaison. And what else do I do, Zach? I do a whole bunch of stuff.
A whole bunch of stuff.
A whole bunch of stuff.
Thank you.
So I'm listening to you, and I love the passion. But we do have a lot of young people that are disconnected. So I guess what I'm asking is, how can we get young people influenced about foreign policy, and when can we actually, what can we do? We got so much going on in the White House. So how can we get them influenced with the foreign policy when we got stuff going on at home?
Absolutely. That is a great question about how you engage youth. I would challenge the premise a little bit that youth are entirely disconnected from the system. I don't think youth are disconnected. I think youth are currently disheartened by the system. They feel that they can't make an impact. I don't think it's that they don't see what's happening. I think they feel they can't move the needle. And I think part of, especially when we talk about foreign affairs, we are talking about big, big things. We're talking about wars. We are talking about natural disasters. We are talking about markets. We are talking about war crimes. It feels really hard to do anything about that because the reality is there is no button you can press to just stop it. There's no one policy that changes things. And part of why when I wrote these remarks, I was like, what is a very narrow thing I can talk about? What is a very small thing that we can change that does have a real impact, but it doesn't feel like this big grandiose action? I think that's where we need to be moving on some of these conversations, is thinking, what is the problem and what are these small pieces that get us there? I think when younger audiences can hear what they can actually do. I'm not asking you to go into a conflict zone and resolve whatever crisis this is. But I'm asking you to pick up the phone and call your member of Congress and say, there's this bill that does this thing, I want you to support that. And that is a lot easier for people to feel connected to engage. And once you get their foot through that door, once they do just one thing, the ball starts snowballing. One action turns into another action, that turns into another action. So I think to answer your question, think small chunks of the big picture to get people engaged.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was a wonderful answer. And I'll say, I pretty much feel a lot of that, especially the burnout. That's the part I'll add on to, is just people can get involved. A lot of times I've seen where folks will get involved and stay involved for a little bit and then completely burn out or get burned. And I've been in that situation myself, where I've been putting my time into something when it comes to politics, and then you feel like you get burned and you completely cut out. And so one thing is giving people hope. The thing that's kept me coming back a lot, well, one is my conscience, but also just the friendly people that I meet. So just being there for other people, I think, is one thing that we're lacking in general in society, and the youth feel it the most in a lot of cases. The youth, as well as seniors, feel it the most, a loneliness crisis we're in. So the first one is from Shazan Sami, a Muslim voter from Fayette County. They ask, what should the Democratic base do so that we elect a president who will listen to our demands to stop funding endless wars and genocides and invest in the people here at home?
I think it's very similar to the answer I just gave. I think it's building up from the roots. Granted, I'm here speaking as a officer from the Young Democrats, so I can't push voters into vote this way or that way. However, like I just mentioned, I think it is about mobilizing ground power to support the beliefs you have, especially about foreign policy, and taking the time to figure out, moving beyond slogans and looking at what is the actual policy or mechanism that we can actually get to change. I think that is the step that we often struggle with, and we end up spinning our tires a lot. Is we know something is wrong, but we don't know how to fix it. We don't know how we actually want to get from point A to point B. And I think that's what we should start communicating to candidates that we are expecting. We are expecting not just a slogan, but give me an actual proposal. Tell me how you're going to actually get there. And use that as a means to actually inspire people to get, as I said earlier, that one step in the door. And as you do that, you're able to mobilize the popular youth, you're able to mobilize the community, and that's how you generate power.
Absolutely. I guess just one little follow-up. How can we tie that directly to the office of the president? Because that's who was mentioned in this question. Is there a sort of bridge?
I have very strong opinions about this. We need to move more foreign policy into the legislative. The president has assumed way too much control over how foreign affairs are run, and there was always intended to be a little bit of that. Of course, you need someone making decisions, but this is a democracy. We don't need someone who represents 50.1 or even less % of the country to be making the decisions that reflect us globally without any consideration of what the popular opinion is. And that's what the Congress exists for. That's why the president is required to brief them on military actions, which we have not been seeing done correctly over this past administration. And that, to my answer, I would actually say the president is important in this case, but I would not focus on the president. I would say the focus needs to be on the legislative and expecting Congress to do more of their job instead of allowing the president to run away with radically unpopular policy.
Great. Well, speaking about moving towards the legislature, so you mentioned Brian Jack earlier, and some good things of how we can pressure some wins and give some thanks for some wins. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And for people who don't live in Brian Jack's district, just Georgia voters in general, how can they contact their legislatures?
Sure. As far as contacting them, you are able to go to their website and they will have phone numbers and emails. Having worked in an office, do not use the email. It does not go in the trash per se, but it will get logged as having been received and then really not have any interest put into it. You want to get on the phone with someone. There are really two separate sides of how a member of Congress runs their offices. The local office is going to handle the casework. So if you need like Social Security help, or if you have a complaint about policing, whatever, that goes there. As far as our conversation today, you want to look for the number for the DC office. They handle the policy side. And that is where you need to call. And again, I want to emphasize, call them, don't email them. But as far as Georgia voters are some of the most prone to the impacts of these cuts of humanitarian aid. I actually pulled up, I have a full sheet of Brian Jack's voting record on humanitarian aid and the economy of Georgia and how this all ties together. And I think it's very easy to lose the bigger picture of, okay, you have this big globe of things happening, but why does that impact me here? We need to understand that Georgia is primarily invested in manufacturing and agriculture, and those are the industries most impacted by our relations globally. So when Trump is levying massive tariffs and resulting in trade wars with our neighbors like Canada, or major powers like China, who buys the majority of like the poultry and the cotton from Georgia, well then the tariffs rise on that, and our producers here are paying more and more to make their living. And we also, and this isn't nearly as local to Georgia 3, but we also have the CDC in Atlanta. It's also important for them that we are able to protect these healthcare jobs, that they are able to continue operating as they have globally. And they, of course, play a major role in the economy of the state as a whole. So we need to understand that when we are talking to our legislators in Georgia, that these impacts of the decisions they're making that feel really far away. Who cares what is happening literally on the other side of the world in the case of China? Really impacts your pocketbook, impacts your job, impacts your ability to put food on the table. And you need to keep that in mind. Instead of getting distracted by how far away things may seem.
Yeah, I mean, you really brought it home to the healthcare. Like, I serve on the Board of Health, and we've seen right here in Spalding County, the cuts have reduced the budget. There's had to be changes made. Hospitals, you know, we see that all over the place. Rural hospitals close. The one in Upson is, that we're worried about it closing. If that hospital closed, the people in Upson County are going to have to come to Spalding County. In an emergency, that could be a huge issue. That's going to overburden the Spalding County Hospital as well. And it could be the same thing if it was Spalding, we'd go to Fayette. I mean, it gets worse and worse. These cuts do affect us at home as well. So that's a wonderful point. Do we have, please, and introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Sinclair. I'm from Upson County. My question has to do with earlier piggybacking off the one that the Muslim gentleman submitted from Fayette County. When it comes to politics and the presidency and Congress, one of the things that Democrats have been weak on is messaging. And I mean messaging not just on the political scale, but in terms of ideology. Because conservatives, especially in the South and in the Bible Belt, they have a monopoly on kids in school and academies, and because there are a lot of private academies there. You got Skipstone, to name one, and these groups, because I attended one called Master's Academy of Fine Arts, and they teach a very conservative worldview. So when these people get older, of course they're going to vote Republican. And Democrats have a timidness when it comes to speaking religiously, which is crazy because you have people like MLK, who was a pastor, and you've got Phil Vischer, who people thought was conservative, but he's actually liberal, who made VeggieTales. And I'm like, how can Democrats create a messaging system, an ecosystem, that counters the Republican one, which will affect how people vote? And connected to what you said, the president should not be doing foreign policy. But Congress abdicated their duty, so what do you do there?
Well,
Can I say one quick thing?
yes.
I think the timidness for a lot of people comes to who's giving them money.
True.
And I'll just leave it there for now.
There is a degree of Congress has given up its constitutional authority on a lot of foreign policy issues, as you mentioned, and kind of question of what do we do then is elect new members of Congress. However, to the bigger point of the messaging campaign, especially as far, you mentioned kind of spiritual, moral messaging like MLK, that at this point, conservatives have created a monopoly over. And I think we are seeing that be challenged. We are seeing that with Tallarico, we see that with Warnock, we are seeing that even Andy Bashir is doing that. So there is increasingly more moral and spiritual messaging in Democratic organizing, and I think that's a very good thing. I think especially here in Georgia, we can relate to that. That is kind of the hallmark of Jimmy Carter,
Yes.
was an incredibly religious Christian boy out of rural Georgia that went on to do some pretty remarkable foreign policy feats as the president. And I think we should absolutely hold to that. There is a degree of morality that we should absolutely incorporate into foreign policy in particular. Foreign policy is an interesting space because it doesn't operate like domestic policy, where you have these kind of somewhat clean rules. You have the Constitution, you have the procedures of how Congress works, yada, yada, yada. A realist view of international affairs would say it's kind of the Wild West out there. And whatever agreements you come to between you and the other powers is kind of what you live by. And once you ditch those, so what? And that puts a pretty significant burden on how countries operate. How do we want ourselves to be portrayed and reflected in our dealings globally? Because we are dealing with authoritarians and autocrats and dictators who commit atrocities every day. And we need to question, are we willing to shake hands with that person? Are we willing to send arms to that person? Are we maybe willing to push for increased democracy? These are issues that you can fight with in international affairs that demands that we bring moral framing to. So I think you kind of had two questions there as to how we incorporate moral framework, and then also what do we do about it. I know the just elect other people is not easy right now, especially with the amount of money in politics. However, we are also seeing, we just saw this in the primaries, that money isn't everything. And especially if you can mobilize people, if you can connect with them, which is what this moral framework does, you're able to beat those big dollars that are pushing us in bad directions.
Yeah, money isn't everything. Money is still something. That makes me think of two great examples from the primary. So Abdul Al-Sayed, running for Senate in Michigan, beat Haley Stevens even though she outspent him 9-1. However, Cori Bush, running in the district for St. Louis in Missouri, was spent 27-1, outspent 27-1 by Wesley Bell, and lost that race once again. So money still has an effect, but we are definitely turning the tide. And as we bring more people into the fold, I believe we will continue to turn that tide.
Also, Abdul Al-Said, he has charisma.
Yes.
That helps in politics, don't it?
Do you want to speak? Oh, yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name is William. First off, I would like to speak to what you're saying about USA. When I was in the military, in the Navy, as we would go around to different ports from Europe to South America, things such as simple as going in and helping to rebuild orphanages or just handing out toothbrushes, it really made a difference in the impact of everybody that we were able to help. So to piggyback off of his question, within our own party, even though many cultures are running parallel for the same positions or for the same results, they're still siloed. How do you speak out to the youth cross-culturally to integrate and really make an impact? And also, on the second part of that is, for the youth that are that have immigrated to the country and they're still coming up, a lot are afraid to speak out or be shown. How do you actually appeal to them and still keep that cross-cultural message?
I think it's really difficult right now to break out of silos. I think social media has made that extraordinarily difficult, and part of that is to do with money again. And I hate spending so much time talking about money and politics, but that has kind of shaped at least my entire time in politics and my entire time growing up. And maybe we're starting to see that break. I think foreign policy is weirdly one of the places where you're able to break out that easier. I think the interconnectedness of us today makes it easier to do that. And you're able to see what's happening on the other side of the world in a way we were never really able to prior to the advent of social media. I think the first strong showing of this that Facebook would love to highlight as their success was getting people aware of what was happening to the Rohingya in that genocide, and that became a very well-known phenomenon within the United States through the means of Facebook specifically. And we have since seen multiple cases where people are becoming aware of tragedies and issues happening around the world for that reason, because we have social media. I think one of the big issues we are facing is kind of who controls that. You see kind of selective bias as to when things get attention and when things do not. The amount of people that, Sudan without question is currently the world's worst humanitarian disaster. In the world, it is horrific. Literal blood seeped into the ground so deep it could be seen from space, and piles of bodies seen by satellite. And then there's another siege ongoing right now that's likely to have the same results. You don't hear that. And that's because it's funded on both sides of the Civil War by oil monarchs who have significant money and significant influence in social media spheres. So you don't see a lot of conversation about that. So I think a huge part of how we start breaking those silos is going to be addressing from a domestic standpoint how we address communication. Who gets to hold a monopoly of how people communicate with one another? Because it's inappropriate that corporations get to dictate the terms on which we engage with one another. So that's kind of a point where domestic efforts channel into the international. And that's probably where we need to start. Other points are also talking to one another. I think that's a lost art right now. Breaking out those silos is kind of cross-cultural communication. We are all aware of what's happening in the places that we most identify with culturally. And talking to your neighbor, who is maybe a little bit different than you, can teach you so much about what's happening around the world. I think that's something really important for us to do, not just to become better informed voters and create better policy, but also to be better neighbors. That is something we as a society need to do better. We need to talk to our community's members a lot more. As far as migrants. I want to be very careful with that because young migrants right now do have a lot of reason to be really skeptical about speaking out right now. The conversations I have had with people about ICE have been terrifying. I remember I got off the plane from Panama after I finished my service with the Peace Corps. And I was so excited to be home. I was thinking about all the food I was going to eat. And I leave the doors of the airplane and enter the gate. And there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 members of ICE armed, just waiting and looking at people as they came through. And that's not the greeting that I want when I come back home to the United States. That's not the United States I believe in. That's not the United States that my family, part of which helped found this country, was founding. And that's not the United States that my family, who fled here as immigrants, fleeing violence in Europe, came to. So it is truly horrific, and I hate to tell them, take a step back, because they shouldn't. But if you feel you can speak up, if you feel you can't talk to your friends, you have allies, you have people who care, you have people who will hear you. Because this is not the America we believe in. This is not the America most Americans believe in. This is a point where even Republicans are losing faith in how the Trump administration is handling, especially border control and immigration. And it is a point where, again, talk to your neighbors, hear their stories, and we can move the needle on that pretty remarkably far. We have moved polling on who Americans trust more on immigration and border control from being a strong Republican issue to now people trusting Democrats more than Republicans. That would have been crazy just 3 years ago. So these conversations matter. So if they feel they can't speak up, they can talk to their friends, they can talk to their neighbors, and it feels very easy to be like, that doesn't make a difference, that doesn't have a real impact. But I think right now that has a bigger impact than anything you can do, is sharing your story, letting people hear about your anxiety and your fear, letting them walk or imagine walking in your shoes and the anxiety you have. Because if anything, that's going to do way more than another social media post or another sign or whatever that is incredibly performative but doesn't actually move voters. Instead, have conversations with voters. Have conversations with your friends who maybe are Republican, who maybe don't agree with you, who maybe think there is a good immigrant and a bad immigrant, and tell them your story. Tell them that when ICE shows up, they don't care if you're a quote-unquote good immigrant or a bad immigrant. They just care that you're an immigrant. And you can watch as people's opinions start to shift and change the more you have those conversations. So I hope that kind of answered both parts of your question. It was a long, rambling answer, but I hope I got there.
It was good. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add, we know that there is a see something, say something attitude with people who may have prejudices, who may want to weaponize this current administration and current forces. So we need to have that attitude the other way. I've seen, I've had conversations with people, and I've seen in group chats of where if you go somewhere and you see ICE and you know people who live in that area or know people who may be affected by that, immigrants, message them, say, hey, I saw this. Because I've seen people say, oh, thank you. I was going to go out today and I'm just going to wait until another day because it might be a little safer for me. So it is definitely time to step up, speak out if you're able to, because some people are at a way elevated risk.
And you can check things that other communities that have already had, especially ICE deployments to their region, how they have responded to it. They have come up with incredibly clever networks to tell people where ICE and border control are operating in. So you can, Memphis is probably the best for you to look at because it's a southern example, but you also have LA, you have Chicago, you have all these examples, and they have built out community structures that are definitely worth looking into depending on the needs of the community.
At least a couple. So does anybody want to? Yes, Autumn, please.
Hi, my name is Autumn. I'm the president of the Young Democrats of Spalding County here. And you work with Young Dems of America, right?
Yes.
Do you actually feel like the Democrats in power listen to the Young Democrats of America?
That's a bit loaded. From a procedural standpoint, there definitely is communication. I can tell you with the rules, this isn't really foreign affairs, but there's some updates on rules coming up, and I have to go to a briefing this upcoming weekend about that to hear the proposed changes. We're actually meeting with Fair Fight about it to discuss a response, which will be really interesting. So we at least get communication with, and we also do have 3 votes at the DNC. Do 3 votes do a lot? You can be the ones to decide that. But there definitely is communication there.
A very respectful answer. And I'll be commenting on it. Yes.
I'm sorry, may I piggyback on Autumn's?
Absolutely.
So how was the conversation between traditionalist Democrats and the Socialist Democrats in America?
In what way? Can you expound kind of what?
Just is there a conversation that's going on for learning to work together? Are they still siloed? How's the conversation just going in general?
I cannot speak as to like the general overarching structure. I handle international affairs, and that's kind of what I have. I will say from the international affairs perspective, we are in pretty significant communications because as far as like international engagement goes, it's hard to show up as a smaller party like groups like YDSC may. So there's a lot more communication and integration with our international affairs team so that we can engage on a larger scale with groups like the International Federation of Liberal Youth, which has pretty substantial parties that are members of that federation. We also meet with more left-wing groups like the International Union of Socialist Youth. I met with the, I guess they call it the Vice President of like the Americas. I was down in Panama. We had a meeting in Panama City briefly and talked about how they operate. So as far as like the traditional liberals and the social democrats and democratic socialists, whatever you may be, we tend to kind of coalesce together because we really do believe in Big Ten politics. And especially on foreign affairs, we can at least agree on the direction we want to go. We see what is wrong, and maybe we don't agree with how you fix that, but especially now while we're in opposition, we can work with that. And in foreign affairs, there are so many issues with so many levels of complexity, you're never going to agree with everyone. Inside my own team, we had a conversation about the ICC the other week, and we were debating, do we take an official stance on the fight J.D. Vance is having with the Marco Rubio, is having with the ICC, and between the 3 of us, we could not agree on the appropriate policy going forward. If the 3 of us could not come to a conclusion, we can't get everyone on the left in agreement. So there's a degree of, we know what is going on is wrong, we can work together to call that out.
Yeah, what I'll add, just from what I've seen organizing with Democrats, especially young Democrats of Georgia, not especially, but that's just my field I've worked in a lot. It's a lot of localization. You'll see different chapters and different committees will work more with socialist organizations than others. So it kind of depends on leadership on both sides, establishment Democratic leadership as well as the organizations in the area, because it's not just DSA across the country. Different left-wing groups, exist all over the place in different local areas, and so it's very localized from what I've seen.
I think your bigger divides are going to be seen on a local level. As far as international affairs kind of gets a cheat code because you have to be a little more conservative because you're working with a lot of different partners. And like I talked about during my opening statements, big moves creates problems. It creates problems in communication. People start distrusting whether or not they can count on you. So you make gradual moves over time and you build to bigger change through a lot of smaller ones. And that means you're able to do a lot more coalition building because you're not going to do a giant jump all at once. Or you shouldn't. We are watching a lot of giant leaps right now, and it's going very, very badly, and it's a textbook case of why you don't do that.
All right, I'm gonna go to our last question from, I call it questions from chat. People who just texted, but we do have an anonymous submission. This is a Christian voter in Lamar County. Has Samuel personally seen any AIPAC influence on U.S. international affairs?
Of course, who hasn't? I think AIPAC, the conversation around AIPAC, and this is something I have a pretty thorough understanding. I came up through college leadership in Jewish leadership. I was on Hillel Internationalist Global Cabinet. I, of course, am a Changemaker Fellow with the Jewish Federations of North America. I've seen AIPAC. I've definitely seen them. I think they are a symptom of a much larger problem we are dealing with in both American politics domestically, but also on the international side. I think the structures we have currently of allowing people to dump money into campaigns are prone to massive amounts of manipulation by foreign powers through so many means. This is not just, my most personal view of it was while working on campus, where as a Jewish leader, I remember working with my friends who were Palestinian leaders, and we worked together and seeing the amount of money pumped into schools pushing hardline messaging was ludicrous. I remember sitting at a table with our SJP, and both of us looked at each other and we were like, we both got censured by our global organization. So right now we have a lot of money coming into systems through political campaigns, through campuses, through community organizations that may look mundane and harmless at first glance, but we really need to look at how the money ends up getting there. I'm all for community organization. I love it, and I think we need more of it, and we need to fund it better. But we need to make sure those funds are coming from people inside the community. You don't want people from another state dumping billions of dollars like Elon Musk into campaign states away. And if that is billionaires, if that is foreign actors, if those are states or corporate entities, no matter what, it is extremely damaging to our democracy currently and has impacts not just on domestic politics, but on how we conduct our international affairs, which is extremely, extremely important given our role globally. There is significant room for people to gain concessions from us, and they can influence not just our politics, but global politics through us as a medium. So we need to be really secure about how we watch money pour into campaigns. And also into the presidency. The Qataris handing the president a jet for him to keep after he leaves the White House is insane. So even while that doesn't fit like the traditional someone donating to a campaign, governments are just doing it right in front of your eyes. They're not even hiding it anymore. So I hate to be like campaign finance reform, but that's the direction we absolutely have to move in.
Yeah, all right. One more question. Yes, please.
My name is Nico Nam, active young Dem over the years, and wanted to come to your Aunt Spalding tonight. And my question for you is basically like, what do you do? How do we reach Democrats abroad? Right, that's a whole thing. It's an organization in and of itself, but is there like a YDA abroad? Like, how do you have any thoughts about how we pull those people to make sure that they're voting this year, right? Anything on that?
Yeah, I would love to talk about that. I was on the board of directors for Democrats Abroad Panama while I was there. I have been there. I see what it looks like. The international affairs officer above me, so my boss is sorry for the mic. The international affairs officer above me is also now serving as the chair of the youth caucus for Democrats Abroad. So we are increasing not only our coordination with them, but we are also increasing our coordination with college Democrats. They also have someone who leads their international affairs programming. So we are working to coalesce this larger network of college students, young voters in the United States, and young voters abroad into one larger entity so that we can coordinate our policy better and mobilize youth voters. As far as how the Democrats Abroad structure works, it's actually really fascinating because it is solely a voter mobilization organization.
Yeah.
So I will say, I got really frustrated while I was on the board of directors because you're told you basically can't do anything. You can't comment on any policy. You can't do any events regarding policy. You just have to mobilize voters, which is very hard to do when you can't talk about policy. But that's how that works, which is why we're increasing our ties to them through the Youth Caucus. So they'll mobilize the voters, and we can talk about the policy, and we can do both at the same time. So I don't know if that answers your
Yeah,
question.
no, that's great,
but
Thank
yeah.
you for that, yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to shout out, you're running for YDG president, right?
Sure. Yeah. Convention next week in Columbus, baby. Buy your tickets.
All right. So, do we have a little bit? We have 5 more minutes. Anybody want to sneak in a question? Okay, I do have a question. So we have seen here in Georgia recently on a local level cyber attacks from foreign nations. And this isn't anything new, but it's amped up a lot, especially from an adversary we're currently in a conflict with. Iran hacked the Clayton County, had a cyber attack on the Clayton County Water Authority. And so, do you have any experience, suggestions, or anything to note or to say to municipal officials around the state or in other states how to be prepared or what maybe to expect as we move forward in this increasingly digital world?
Wow. Best of luck. I mean, like, I hate to say this, but as far as great power competition goes, the United States has become incredibly outdated in how we manage it. Conflict is no longer big wars where you're in the trenches firing at one another. It is constant cyber attacks, it is constant espionage, and AI completely changes the game. We are able to do it at rates that were never dreamed possible beforehand. Now AI even does their own cyber attacks without being prompted to do so. We just saw that with OpenAI and Claude. So really we need to expect our federal officials to start building a new framework of how we understand our interactions with the rest of the world. We need to modernize just completely across the board how we engage with adversaries. We're likely to see probably even more of that in the near future. I know a report just came out that we are expecting Russia to test NATO's resolve by some sort of attack against NATO. That's likely to come in some sort of espionage or cyber warfare. Iran, of course, are experts in this. This is where they're really strong, in addition to non-conventional warfare with drones. That's another aspect where the United States is deeply, deeply behind. We were looking at Hegseth fighting with the president about munitions recently because we are firing $1 million missiles. We are firing THAADs to take down only a couple of $1,000 drones. So we are wasting billions on taking down basic Shahed drones. So it's part of a much larger, much larger problem that we are dealing with as a country. And as a municipal official, I don't have a good answer for you. Other than we as a whole really need to look at how we respond to instances like that, because we're on a trajectory where that's just going to be normal. We are going to be okay with foreign powers interfering with the infrastructure of our country, which would be a war crime if it were done in any conventional manner. If you bomb a power grid, if you bomb a water plant, that's a war crime. But now it's just normal because it's done over the network. Like that doesn't make sense, and we need to do significant review of how we interpret that. Is declaring it an act of war probably extreme? Maybe. but we also need to find where we're going to draw pretty firm lines, and we need to communicate that. And that's a huge part of what we are failing to do right now is communication to our adversaries, where our lines are drawn and standing on it. Right now we like to flip-flop, and we can't do that. They need to know when we're serious, we're serious.
Well, I certainly am not an expert in cybersecurity, but what I will say, if any municipal officials are watching later, there's nothing wrong with a quick email or a phone call to your city manager, clerk, or IT director saying, hey, have we checked you don't even have to use the right language, just have we checked the backlogs, have we seen if there's any interruptions, because there will be sleeper agents. So a lot of systems get in and stay in for a while, like a virus that'll live inside you before showing symptoms. So there's nothing wrong with just a little, hey, can we check on this, you know? And so I guess we can end it there. Samuel, where can people reach out to you?
So right now I'm currently growing my digital presence again since getting back to the United States. So I would love it if you follow me on my Instagram, which is samuelj.cross. I am trying to outgrow the other deputy. So if we can grow that as quickly as possible, that would be great. I also am starting to write Substacks again, which are posted on there as well. So if you were interested by the AI map that I mentioned during my opening remarks, I've already written a Substack about that, and we'll hopefully have something up next week as well, probably talking about a lot of what I talked about today. But yeah. Also, we have upcoming events in development for the International Affairs Committee. We will, in the near future, have an event with Canada about campaign management and campaign tactics. And we're going to be inviting Americans, Canadians, of course, and really anyone from the Anglosphere. And we're going to have some people from the rest of the Americas joining us as well. So make sure to follow our Instagram, that's YDA International, and we will update you about when that comes out. And hopefully, no promises, but we should be sending some international volunteers down to Georgia to help campaign in November.
All right then. All right.
So that no promises, but I feel pretty good about it. But yeah.
All right, let's give this a cross big. Thank you all for coming out, and I just want to thank our volunteers from the Young Democrats of Spalding County, as well as from the Fayette County Democrats. I want to thank 1216 Events that is hosting us tonight, and Mia Miranda, who couldn't be here, but of course is a wonderful organizer with us here in the local area. She does have a little sign over here if you might want to work with her and use this venue. 10%, I believe it's either 10 or 15%, it says on the sign, 10%, 5?
15.
15, okay. 15% of all proceeds that go to this venue go to the Whole Life Healing Center, which helps transition domestic abuse survivors out of temporary housing, make sure they have furniture and the things they need to start their life over again. So I want to thank Mia one more time and Samuel one more time and all of you for being here.